Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today we're going to be talking about why you need a system for mixing, or pretty much anything in audio or music production. But today we're going to be focusing on mixing. I'm not only going to kind of try to explain what a system is in the context of mixing, but I think I'm going to persuade you why you need to adopt one right now. I think I'm going to skewer or completely smash any objections or concerns or quibbles you have about this idea. And I'm also going to give you a sample system, actually not just a sample system, a system that I think is going to work the best for the majority of people who are interested in mixing music or other audio. So let's get right into it. We'll do sponsor shout outs, all that stuff a little later on. If you can, for getting right into this episode, if you give me a smash of the like button if you're on the YouTubes, or a 5-star rating review if you're listening to an audio-only version of this podcast, super, super helpful to me. And now I'm going to try to be helpful to you. Okay, so what is a system in the context of mixing? I mean, a system is really a repeatable approach, a kind of order of operations, a process that you go through again and again. And there's two significant ways in which you can adopt a system. But before I even get into that, I just want to squash some of the objections to a system and having one, and give you some of the reasons why you should care and why you should be chomping at the bit to develop your own system, your own unique process or workflow for mixing that is repeatable. So the biggest thing that comes up as a critique of the idea of having a system, we don't want things to be too formulaic, man. This is art, man. You know, that kind of stuff. And I get it. However, you're going to be much more creative with a system than without one. You really actually kind of need to have rules to work within to be creative. To try new things, there has to be some set of parameters in which to try new things. That's number one. And number two, you need to find a way to get technical stuff out of the way so you can focus on being creative. Let's see if we can use some analogies here. I'm going to use a jiu-jitsu analogy because I do jiu-jitsu, and because since we're under quarantine, I haven't had the ability to do it as often as I'd like. So apologies for me indulging myself, but hopefully this is a useful analogy to you too. And I'll also try to throw some other analogies in there that might make even more sense to you. But jiu-jitsu is a sport or a martial art where people get together and they say, here's a set of rules that we're going to agree to. We're going to try to grapple with each other and win, but we're not going to poke each other's eyes out. We're not going to kick each other in the groin. We're actually not going to even punch each other. There's the set of framework that we're going to create, a set of rules, a framework we're going to create, and we're going to work within that. And within that, there's thousands upon thousands of techniques in jiu-jitsu. And even if you're not inventing your own new technique, you're expressing yourself through your understanding of all the techniques that exist. You get to show off what is most important to you. What do you think is most essential? What's most efficient? What's most beautiful within this range of techniques that you can use? And the same is true for like any sport. I know we're music people. We're not big sport people. I get that. But if you didn't have any rules around, say, football or basketball or tennis, if I said, hey, we're going to go and do jiu-jitsu, come down, bring a tennis racket and a basketball, and we'll figure out something, you're going to spend all of your time figuring out how to play the game rather than playing the game. And this is true of any sport or really any human activity. It's true of creating music to a significant degree. It's true of art. Even people who don't make representative art, say a Jackson Pollock who's, splattering paint on the ground, he has a system, a framework that he was working within, a kind of set of rules or parameters in which he could be creative. So that's thing number one. If you're just trying to create the rules all the time, you don't end up playing the game. You end up creating a million different games that could have been, but you don't spend time actually playing the game. So you need some set of parameters in which to be creative and actually do. All right? So that is thing number one. And thing number two is that you're getting technique and technology to a degree out of the way so you can focus on really what matters the most in the art. What do you want to prioritize? What do you want to bring out the most? How you want to express yourself within this context, this craft of mixing or music production in general. And a big thing is to get the technology out of the way so you can be creative. So the first component to having a system is having a template, is having your signal flow set up in advance before you touch a single knob. Because the biggest thing that messes people up when they're mixing is they go back and forth between the technician mindset and the artist mindset. The technician mindset and the artist mindset. Oh, I'm being a technician now. I have to set up these reverbs and route them, and I have to set up this thing, and I have to do an aux and a bus, and now I'm going to set up my bus for the drum. And you're taken completely out of the actual mixing, the reacting to the music. So you've got to do that early on. You've got to do it initially, you've got to do it fast, and you've got to do it by having a template. So that is why the course that I do for those people who've taken mixing breakthroughs, it starts off with setting a template. It's like thing number one. And it is a constant thing that has come up in so many of the best mixers that I've been interviewing for the past decade now. Almost all of them get the technology out of the way first through some kind of template, whether that's an in-the-box DAW template that they work with, or if they're working on old school analog system, it's them or their assistant doing all of the patching first, getting that stuff out of the way before they dive in. The second important part to having a system is to having a repeatable order of operations that you go through. And one of the reasons I was inspired to do today's topic is I got a question recently on YouTube, which is, Justin, what do you think we should do first? Should you set levels first or apply effects, or when do you do your automation? And I actually have an answer to that. And I go into it in great detail in the Mixing Breakthroughs course, but this is not a big sales pitch for the Mixing Breakthroughs course. I'm just going to give it to you. This is what I tell people in Mixing Breakthroughs in Module 1. I set up that course in the order of operations that I think you should actually do a mix that's going to work for the vast majority of people. So I'm going to suggest to you an order of operations right now. Before I do, I want to tell you why it's important. If you don't have an order of operations and you just kind of like grab at different things, you're going to mix in an aimless way. You're never going to know what you should be prioritizing, how long you should be spending on each part of the mix. You're never going to prioritize things properly and have a really great path through the mix. So to make things streamlined, to make things effective, to make it a skill that you're repeating, that you're getting better at, I recommend taking the same path again and again. Now, the journey down that path is going to be completely different depending on the music that you're mixing, the needs of the music, all of that stuff. But if you have the same order of operations each time, it's really going to help you out. And again, in interviewing some of the best mixers on the planet for the past decade, I found that this consistently comes up. So here's the order of operations that I recommend for you in a mix. Number one, you first try to get the mix as good as you can, doing nothing but mixing. The mixing part of mixing, setting levels, setting balances, maybe introducing pan. And that is the biggest first thing. I've heard other people recommend this as well and refer to it as the static mix. That's fine. Just your basic mix where you're setting your first initial levels. No automation, just spending time on levels. But even within that idea of setting levels, what is your priority? What's your order of operations there? What do you set the levels of first? I think that's an important question. And I'm going to give you two different answers for this depending on what kind of material you're working with and depending on what kind of approach you like. Answer number one to which things to set levels to first is start with the most important elements. And this, I got to say, is probably the most popular form of mixing. And a lot of people just bring up, say, drums first, maybe by default, and then they add in bass, that kind of thing. And if the most important element in your mix is drums, that can actually make a lot of sense to start by first bringing in the drums, if that is the most important thing in the mix. In other genres and other styles, though, it's going to be the vocals. They're going to be the first thing that you bring in. But that is a big thing, to bring in the most important elements first, and then add in additional elements pretty much in their order of importance. The other way to set levels, though, is if you have a really great rough mix to work from, where you can bring it up in your DAW and all of the plugins and settings are there, and you know that you're just trying to improve on the levels and everything that are already set in that rough mix to some degree, then you can start with kind of everything up. And the very first thing you do is take notes of what needs to change compared to the original rough mix. Prioritize those in an order of importance, starting with level balances, and then go in and do level balances. Actually, I'm kind of leaving out a step here. The very first step should be step 0, make notes of what needs to happen in the mix. And that's really step 0 before we get to any of this stuff. And then it's step 1, setting levels, using either the introducing most important elements first approach or all faders up to start and focusing on most important elements first approach. So that's it. Step number 1, focusing on levels. Step number 2 is where I'd recommend the things you couldn't accomplish with just level because things are being masked. That's when you start focusing more on EQ. Once you've gone and EQ'd things, then you have kind of step number 3, where you're focusing more on compression. Those things that weren't able to be put in just the right place by using level and then EQ to relieve masking alone. There's some elements that are occasionally too loud and occasionally too quiet. Here's where we're focusing more significantly on compression and dynamic range control. And then after that is when I generally recommend playing around with effects, your time-based effects, your spatial effects, all of those additional ear candy things that are not the spine and structure of the mix, but are the icing on the cake that, gives it its flavor and its appearance, and so much of the creativity happens there. But I think it's a mistake to go into that aspect of things too heavily and try to refine those things too heavily before you have the bones and the structure in place, before you've baked the cake, right? Bake the cake first, then put the icing on top and decorate it. And when you put the icing on top and decorate it, man, it's going to totally transform that cake. But if you put that icing on an unbaked cake, good luck with that. So that's why I recommend not doing that too intensively at first. Now, there's so many caveats that you could offer here and that I would offer here too. There are exceptions and other things that I would make, but I still think that basic structure, first, figure out what the most important things are to do in the mix before you touch a thing, step number 0. Then step number 1, starting to work with your levels, overall static mix. Then your step number 2, introducing EQ. Your step number 3, introducing additional compression and dynamic range control. Your step number 4, your effects. And then your 5th step, once you've done that, and here's the big thing that separates so many okay mixes from great ones, is automation. And your volume automation, I think, is generally going to be the last step, but it's one of the most important steps. And by volume automation, I mean going in there and saying, should this vocal phrase be slightly higher or slightly quieter? These hi-hats, now that it's a guitar solo happening, should they come down? This shaker instrument, now that we're in this really sparse section, should it come down? Now that we're in this really dense section, it's getting masked, should it come up? That kind of volume automation I recommend as a last step. Now, with that said, these are themes, and there's going to be crossover and there's going to be bleed among these. If you've heard me talk about mixing in more detail, or if you've heard me make recommendations in the Mixing Breakthrough course, you probably know that I actually recommend you put on a mix bus compressor fairly early, even as part of step 1. So that's one piece of crossover there, where certain types of compression, your mix bus compression or your bus compression, may be introduced fairly early on before that compressor stage. That idea of having a bus compressor you mix through might be part of the level setting thing, right? During that initial stage of figuring out what are the most important things and what are the things that need to be addressed first, maybe for this particular production, and it's rare, but maybe for this particular production, one of the most important things is getting the right reverb sound for the vocals or for the snare that's going to set the mood of the entire track. Because that reverb sound should really be part of that instrument. It's not an effect that you're adding on at the end. It's almost like a part of the production. And refining that reverb sound is something that the whole production is going to swirl around. Like the fact that you have this vocal with this kind of reverb is a super important part of it. And this would almost be, again, like a step 0 kind of thing before even getting into level balances. You're kind of bringing up the most important element and working on the production of that most important element. This is post-production. It's not just mixing. It is the kind of effect setting that you almost wish was done in the recording, and now you're going to do it before you get into the mixing. So that's another place where something that should be later on in the process comes first. So here's the thing. Once you have the rules, you can break them. And so many people do. But I think if you're having trouble mixing quickly, efficiently, with great repeatable results every time without second guessing yourself, you need to first start working on setting up a system. That means, number one, getting all of your effects processing, technical stuff out of the way first, all of your routing, have a template. And then have an order of operations. If you think the order of operations that I've offered right now is dumb and isn't the one you want to follow, that's fine. Don't. Pick out one of your own. And once you've picked out your own, and once you've gotten comfortable with that process, feel free to break it or to stray from it. But I think it's good to have a roadmap to come back to for when you get lost and to help you get to your end destination much faster, much better, and with much more room for creativity than otherwise. Well, I hope this episode has been useful for you. I want to give a big shout out to one of my favorite creative effects makers, sponsor of this podcast from the beginning, and that is Soundtoys. Try out anything they make for free over at soundtoys.com. Some of the most interesting creative effects out there, period. So many of the great mixers and engineers who I talk to at SonicScoop every day love and use their stuff. You might love it and use it too. So definitely check them out. And thanks for joining me for this episode of the podcast. If you want to go even deeper with me, but don't want the full-length course Mixing Breakthroughs, you can check out some free stuff I do. I've got the 5 Habits of Truly Great Mixers. It's a workshop that I think you're really going to enjoy. You can get that at SonicScoop.com/mixhabits. That's SonicScoop.com/mixhabits. Definitely check that out. Remember to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for joining me here at the SonicScoop podcast. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.